confident black woman walks into a bank, fully prepared to secure a loan for her business. But instead, she's met with arrogance, discrimination, and outright dismissal. Hours later, when she returns, not as an applicant but as the most powerful person in the room, the bank manager's entire world turns upside down. What happens when those who judge too quickly find out they made the biggest mistake of their lives? Let us know in the comment section below. Monica Davis had been in this position before, too many times, walking into spaces where people doubted her, where she had to prove over and over again that she belonged. But today was different. Today she was over it. Dressed in a sharp navy blue pantsuit and heels that clicked with authority against the marble floors, she stepped into the sleek lobby of Hamilton First Bank, a financial institution that prided itself on supporting small businesses. The irony wasn't lost on her. She approached the front desk with a polite but firm smile. "Good afternoon. I have an appointment with Mr. Ethan Coleman regarding a business loan." The receptionist, a young woman with a tight blonde bun and a nameplate that read Jessica, glanced up from her computer. Her eyes flickered over Monica's outfit, then her face, the subtle shift in her expression saying more than words ever could. "Name?" she asked, almost like it was a formality she didn't think was necessary. "Monica Davis." Jessica tapped a few keys and nodded. "Have a seat. Mr. Coleman will be with you shortly." Monica exhaled slowly, crossing the waiting area and lowering herself into a plush gray chair. The bank was filled with businessmen in crisp suits, clutching leather portfolios and talking loudly on their phones. Every now and then she caught a glance thrown her way, some curious, some dismissive. It wasn't new. She straightened her shoulders, reminding herself why she was here. Her company, Davis Financial Solutions, was already profitable. She had built it from the ground up, working tirelessly to provide financial literacy resources to underprivileged communities. She wasn't here begging. She wasn't asking for a favor. She was applying for a business loan that she more than qualified for. A deep voice broke her thoughts. "Ms. Davis." She looked up to see Ethan Coleman, a tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a confident smirk that felt more condescending than welcoming. "Mr. Coleman," she greeted, rising to shake his hand. His grip was limp, disinterested. "Right this way." She followed him past glass offices, down a hallway lined with motivational posters about success and opportunity. The hypocrisy made her want to laugh. Inside his office, he motioned to a chair before sinking into his leather seat. "So," he began, lacing his fingers together on the desk. "A business loan, correct?" Monica nodded, setting down her folder. "Yes. I'm seeking a $250,000 expansion loan for Davis Financial Solutions. My company specializes in—" He waved a hand, cutting her off. "I reviewed your application." She waited, expecting him to continue. When he didn't, she prodded. "And?" Ethan leaned back, exhaling loudly as if he were already exhausted from the conversation. "Ms. Davis, let me be honest with you." He adjusted his tie, eyes scanning her like he was trying to measure her worth. "Your company is interesting, but these types of businesses, financial education for low-income communities," he chuckled, shaking his head, "they don't typically generate the kind of revenue that makes a loan of this size a safe bet." Monica's face remained neutral, but her hands curled slightly under the desk. "If you reviewed my application, then you saw that I have a 750 credit score, an annual revenue of $1,300,000, and zero debt. I also have $100,000 in capital to offset any risk, so I'm failing to see where the issue is." Ethan smirked like he was amused. "It's not just about numbers, Miss Davis. It's about stability, longevity. We have to consider the realities of certain businesses, and frankly, yours doesn't quite fit our lending profile." Her jaw tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. "Let me clarify," she said, voice calm but firm. "Are you saying that a business that's profitable, debt-free, and financially stable somehow doesn't fit?" Ethan sighed, like he was tired of having to explain himself. I'm saying we prefer to lend to businesses with a proven track record, established industries, retail, hospitality, manufacturing. Your company is... He shrugged, letting the silence speak for him. Monica tilted her head. Let me ask you something, Mr. Coleman. If I were a white man with the exact same application, would we be having this conversation? The smirk faltered. Now, let's not make this about race. She smiled coldly. I didn't. You did. The tension thickened. Ethan tapped his pen against the desk before exhaling sharply. Look, Ms. Davis, I have a meeting in a few minutes. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but your application has been denied. There it was. No attempt to justify it with facts. Just a blunt... She studied him for a moment. The arrogance, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. Then she stood. She gathered her documents, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Coleman, she said smoothly. This has been enlightening. Ethan's lips twitched in amusement. Best of luck to you. Monica didn't look back as she walked out of his office. Didn't look at Jessica at the front desk. Didn't look at the other bankers watching her with barely concealed curiosity. She just walked, not because she was defeated, because she knew something Ethan didn't. And by the end of the day, his entire world would come crashing down. Ethan Coleman leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms behind his head, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Another unqualified applicant denied, another risk avoided. He had seen the look in Monica Davis's eyes before, that quiet, burning frustration, that indignant righteousness. He had dealt with enough people like her to know how this worked. They came in thinking they deserved something, waving numbers and statistics like golden tickets, expecting the world to bend for them. But the world didn't work that way. At least, not for people like her. Ethan chuckled to himself, shuffling a few papers on his desk. He prided himself on his ability to read people. Monica had potential, sure. She was confident, intelligent, and composed. But she didn't belong in the big leagues. She'd be better off applying for a microloan or crowdfunding her little operation. Still, he admired the fight. It almost made things more fun. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Jessica, the receptionist, peeked her head in, her expression unusually tight. Mr. Coleman, the regional vice president needs you in the boardroom, immediately. Ethan frowned. For what? I can see, Gus said. Something about her tone gave him pause. He adjusted his tie and stood, smoothing out the creases in his suit. All right, he muttered, grabbing his pen and notepad. This better not be another pointless compliance meeting. As he walked through the halls, he noticed the unusual buzz in the bank. People whispering, eyes darting toward him before quickly looking away. Employees who normally greeted him avoided his gaze. He entered the executive boardroom, where the bank's top executives were seated, including the CEO, Thomas Ellington. That alone was unusual. Ellington didn't usually sit in on standard meetings unless something major was happening. Ethan's unease grew. He slid into a chair, offering a casual smile. Good afternoon, gentlemen. What's this about? Ellington, a stiff man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive watch, tapped his fingers on the table. We have a guest arriving shortly. A guest? Ethan repeated. Before anyone could answer, the double doors swung open, and in walked Monica Davis. Ethan's smirk vanished. She was different now. The poised confidence was still there, but there was something else. A quiet authority. She wasn't here for a meeting. She wasn't here as an applicant. She was here as the most powerful person in the room. Gentlemen, Monica greeted, her voice calm, her eyes sweeping across the table before settling on him. I appreciate you making time for me. Ellington rose, buttoning his suit jacket. Miss Davis, it's an honor to have you here. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Miss Davis. "Otter, what's going on?" he asked, forcing a chuckle. "Are we reconsidering her application?" A few of the executives shot him looks. One of them, a younger VP, actually looked embarrassed for him. Ellington cleared his throat. "Ethan, allow me to introduce Monica Davis, Federal Reserve Director for the Southeastern region." Ethan's entire body went cold. The Federal Reserve Director? The Federal Reserve Director. It hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Monica tilted her head slightly, watching the realization settle into his bones. "It's funny, isn't it?" she mused. "How perception shapes reality?" Ethan's mouth went dry. She held up a hand, silencing him with a look. "I came into this bank today not as a Federal Reserve Director, but as a business owner, an applicant." Her voice remained composed, but the weight of it settled over the room like a storm cloud. "And what I experienced was exactly what I came here to investigate." The whispers, the uneasy glances, it all made sense now. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a reckoning. Ellington gestured for her to continue. Monica pulled out a folder from her leather portfolio, setting it on the table. "This," she said, sliding it toward the executives, "is a report detailing discriminatory lending patterns across multiple branches of Hamilton First Bank, patterns that show a consistent and statistically significant disparity in loan approvals between white and minority applicants, with no basis in financial viability." Ethan's chest tightened. Ellington opened the file, his brows furrowing as he skimmed through it. "This can't be right," another executive muttered, flipping through the pages. "Oh, it's right," Monica assured them. "The numbers don't lie. Black and brown business owners who meet or exceed financial qualifications are twice as likely to be denied loans compared to their white counterparts. That is not an accident. That is not a coincidence. That is discrimination." The room was silent. Ethan's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Monica turned her gaze to him. "Ethan Coleman," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You denied my application today. Care to explain why?" Sweat pricked his forehead. His mind raced for an excuse, something he could say to justify what had just happened. "Well," he started, his voice coming out dry, "it's standard practice to assess risk, and given the nature of your business, we have to be cautious about—" Monica leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Risk?" she echoed. "You mean the business with zero debt, a 7-figure revenue, and a 6-figure cash reserve? That risky business?" Ethan felt the heat creeping up his neck. "It's not just numbers, it's about industry trends." Monica didn't blink. "And yet, this bank has approved dozens of loans for businesses with less financial security than mine, including a new coffee shop venture just last week, owned by the son of one of your golf buddies." The room stiffened. Ethan's pulse pounded. Monica smiled, slow and deliberate. "But I'm sure that was just a coincidence." Silence. Ellington exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Ethan," he said, his voice now dangerously low, "do you realize what you've done?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Sir?" "I have compliance officers on the phone right now," Monica cut in, "and this is just the beginning. The Federal Reserve is launching an immediate investigation into this bank's lending practices." Ethan felt like the floor had disappeared from beneath him. Monica gathered her files, standing with quiet elegance. "I have meetings to attend," she said, turning toward the door. "But I wanted to make sure I personally delivered this message." Her gaze locked with Ethan's one last time. "Be very careful who you underestimate," she said softly. "It might just be the person who writes the rules you have to follow." And with that, she walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan collapsed back into his chair, his pulse hammering. He was screwed. Ethan Coleman sat frozen in his chair, his mind racing for a way out. The meeting had ended, but the damage was done. The weight of what had just happened crushed him like a vice around his chest. The Federal Reserve Director. He had dismissed her, rejected her, belittled her. And now his entire career was hanging by a thread. The executives were still seated around the table, flipping through the damning report Monica had left behind. Ethan could hear their murmurs, their whispered conversations, the barely concealed disgust in their voices. "Ugh, this is a disaster," one of the senior executives muttered. "The press is going to eat us alive," another said. Ethan felt the heat of their glares but refused to look up. Ellington, the CEO, let out a slow, controlled breath. "I want every single loan application review from the past 5 years on my desk by tomorrow morning," he instructed. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight, his fury barely contained. The room was thick with disappointment. Mr. Ellington, if I could just—" Ethan finally spoke, but the CEO cut him off with a sharp, lethal look. "Not a word," he snapped. "Not a word." Ethan shrank back, swallowing hard. Ellington turned to the others. "Everyone but Ethan, leave." The room emptied within seconds. Once the door shut, Ellington leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "Do you have any idea," he began, his voice low and deadly, "what you've done to this institution?" Ethan opened his mouth, but there was no excuse that would fix this. "We're under federal investigation now," Ellington continued. "Not by some compliance officer, by the goddamn Federal Reserve Director." He shook his head in disbelief. "And you're the one who put us here." Ethan flinched. "I didn't know who she was," he admitted weakly. Ellington's laugh was cold. "Oh, is that what you're going with?" His eyes burned into Ethan's. "Do you think it matters who she was? Would you have approved her loan if she had been just another black business owner?" Ethan didn't answer, because the truth was obvious, and that truth was a death sentence. Ellington exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temple. "Effective immediately, you are terminated." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Wait, sir, please. Security will escort you out." Ellington pressed a button on his phone, and within seconds 2 uniformed security guards entered. "This is ridiculous," Ethan sputtered, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "You can't just—" "This isn't a discussion," Ellington cut him off. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." The security guard stepped forward, but Ethan remained seated, stunned. He had been at Hamilton First Bank for 18 years. He had climbed the ranks, secured a corner office, built a life of privilege and control, and now, because of one decision, one underestimation, it was all gone. His hands trembled as he finally stood, smoothing out his jacket. Dignity, control, that was all he had left. But as he walked out, past the desks of employees who were already whispering about him, he realized something else. He had been the untouchable one, the one who could deny people opportunities without a second thought. And now he was the one being dismissed. As Ethan was being escorted out, Monica Davis sat in her car across the street, watching through the glass windows of the bank. Her lips curled into a subtle smile as she saw Ethan's expression. Stiff, humiliated, and completely undone. Justice, not just for her, but for every black business owner who had walked through that bank's doors, only to be turned away. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from one of her contacts at the Wall Street Journal. "Got the story. This is going to be front-page news. Congrats, Director Davis." Monica's fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed back, "This is just the beginning." She set her phone down, exhaling. The power of being underestimated was that people never saw you coming. But once you arrived, there was no stopping you. End of story.